Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, Fred.
Good morning. This is a pretty exciting edition of the podcast. We're going to be hearing from some of your students. In New Jersey, we had big news this month with Governor Murphy announcing that the state is putting out a request for expressions of interest, an RFEI, for companies to submit informative proposals to the state DOT to design, build, and operate an electric-powered self-driving transit system using minibus-type vehicles. Now, this is going to be in the city of Trenton with an eye toward expanding from there. It's a breakthrough when it comes to using this technology to provide mobility services in a location where it's needed by people. But there are many Trentons, places where these kinds of mobility services could help improve lives. And Alain, you asked a group of your students to help identify some. Tell us a little bit about this to begin with before we call on the students.
Well, I don't think I asked them. I mean, if they want to pass the course, they had to do it. So this was an assignment. I mean, this is, they were forced into it, and I painted them into a corner, and they had to do it. But the assignment is really to look across the U.S. To places that they're familiar with, their hometowns, and look and start there to see to what extent are there Trentons there, and to look to see whether or not, whether there are or there aren't, how a driverless vehicle system focused on equity, affordability, sustainability, and high quality mobility could be put in place and then serve as a linchpin to expansion throughout their county and throughout their state. And since I have a cross section of students in my class from many neighborhoods across the country, and in fact across the world, I mean, we had to do something for the kids that were from Australia. So they adopted a location, or maybe I steered them towards a location, and basically go and investigate. What makes this possible is that I had a student some years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, who put together a database of individual trip movements throughout the United States on a typical day. Individual, what we would call travel demand for the 310 million people in the US as per the 2010 census, coming up to something like 1.1 billion trips per day, individual trips, A to B. With a departure time, with a purpose, going to school, going to shoot hoops, going to the store, going to whatever. And this database basically is reflective of the demographics across the United States. And so having access and availability of these individual trip movements, the question is, to what extent could a safe, equitable, affordable, high quality, sustainable mobility system serve these particular communities? To what extent would it allow them to get to work, get to school, get to wherever, get back home, go out and enjoy an evening? And basically they have access to the data files, and basically I let them loose, and you look, you investigate, you tell us. And so that's the background.
So we're going to turn first to Jack Woll. Jack, tell us about yourself and then what you focused on.
Thanks, Fred. I'm Jack. I'm a senior in the WARPS department. I'm from Walnut Creek, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I also did research with Professor Kornhauser during my freshman summer. So it's been fantastic to see this come full circle my senior year with the wonderful news in Trenton, as well as being able to work on this project myself with some of my friends to see what it would look like in other cities across the US. So I'll share my screen. This is the slide deck that we presented on last Friday. Our group members are from Hawaii, California, Florida, and Connecticut. And we also focused on Washington. And so our project looked at primarily a smaller scale analysis, like similar to a city level, on a 3x3 mile, and then a 9x9 mile, and then the county and the state level that can contain those cities, and the states that correspond to those cities. So we took a look at Hawaii, California, Washington, Florida, and Connecticut. And so in Hawaii, we looked at Honolulu. In California, both Jason and I are from areas pretty close to Oakland. So we looked at Oakland. Washington, we looked at Seattle. Florida, we looked at Coral Springs, one of the hometowns of one of our group mates. And in Connecticut, we looked at Greenwich. And we identified these villages in accordance with what we learned in the class, and in accordance with the vision that brought Professor Kornhauser to focus on Trenton. That, like he said earlier, trying to provide equitable, safe, sustainable, affordable, and efficient mobility in order to provide mobility for the mobility marginalized. And those are people who lack access to transportation. And the fact that we want to provide this transportation because we believe this transportation increases people's basic quality of life, being able to get home from work faster without having to wait for the bus, and without having to have a PhD in schedule reading to figure out where you need to go from point A to point B on the bus. And who are the mobility marginalized? Like, as shown in the class, the people with disabilities, the senior citizens, households with limited mobility, enrolled students. So for example, in our project, I know our group mates can touch later on about exactly how we identified in our simulations who we wanted to serve as our initial market share that we targeted. And so in this vision, like as a side note, we know that qualitatively we'd have to cultivate grassroots support. Like the communities in these areas would need to appreciate the value that we're sharing with them with this proposal, and also see the way that it could make their lives better, because otherwise the programs just won't work. And likewise, the other component, which we know has been talked about on this podcast and with Professor Kornhauser's work at large, that we want to create this welcoming environment, this grassroots support, so that titans of the AV industry will want to come and make this a reality. And so to identify these communities, we used geographic income distributions, such as on justicemap.com, which shares income by a census block level, which we thought was incredibly useful because in some communities, for example, Oakland, we recognize that there will be large swaths of the community that we could be considered mobility marginalized, and we thought that would be greatly benefited by us implementing a program here. But we also wanted to take a look at cities that might be more akin to other cities close to Trenton, like Princeton. And so where there might be not necessarily large swaths of the population that are mobility marginalized, but small pockets within those populations that lack access to mobility, in which case we could help serve those. And in that case, we looked at Greenwich, Connecticut, which has an extraordinarily high median household income, but has some census block where the median income is far, far, far below the median for that entire city. And so I think that's the groundwork for what we did in our simulations qualitatively. And I think I can pass it off to another one of my group mates to explain exactly what we were doing and the benefits of the methodology that we use to simulate these cities. So Connor, would you want to pass the torch?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also a senior at Princeton and I'm in the Orphy department as well. So I am from Fairfield County, Connecticut. So my focus city was Greenwich, Connecticut. So I guess a little bit smaller than a city, but as Jack mentioned, I think it was a really interesting example because it parallels Princeton, New Jersey in a lot of ways, especially given that public transit really isn't an option. Everyone owns multiple cars, and at the same time, there's still a lot of people coming in for trips. There's a big service industry in the downtown. There's a lot of stores, and public transit would be extremely beneficial in the town. So it was exciting for me to be able to work with this group on this project, and obviously to learn from Professor Kornhauser. It's also somewhat related to what will be my thesis research, which is going to be focusing on a similar type of network routing in airline networks. So and a lot of the thanks also goes out to Austin and Mason, who aren't here, who our coding wizards and empowered us to do a lot of the technical work on the back end. But the core process was building out a modular framework. So as Professor Kornhauser said, we had access to a database of simulated trips for every person, point A to point B to point C, point D throughout the day. And from that, we could build out kind of a modular framework to understand given demand at certain times of the day. And we'll eventually show you plots of that, what that demand looks like. Where will cars need to be routed to serve that demand? And then, accompanying that, can they pick up passengers along the way, right? Are their trips going in similar directions? And from that, we can see how many cars we will need, because if demand's spread out over the day, or if we can share rides, we can potentially make our network more efficient and reduce the number of cars. And all of that was built in a way that we could run it at the village level, at the county level, and at the state level, which was, I think, a really, really cool opportunity, and something that being able to leverage Python to do, I think was pretty neat. So if we could flip to, actually, this slide's a pretty good one to do an overview. We calculated some key metrics throughout the project. So one of the key things we were looking at on the note of car sharing was ADO and AVO. So these stand for average departure occupancy and average vehicle occupancy. And right off the bat, we see some pretty big differences between our markets, right? So markets that are pretty dense, like Hawaii, for example, where it's an island and everything's pretty constrained, means people take similar trips in similar directions. So we can really fill up our A taxis and have potentially 6 or 7 people in each car throughout the day. That really kind of leverages scale and means their minimum fleet size is smaller for a city of a given population. On the flip side, right, Connecticut is pretty rural, right? There are areas of low density. And so our average vehicle occupancy drops all the way down to 2.4, right? So for a much smaller town, it has much less than 10% of Hawaii's population, but we need more than 10% of the cars, right? And so that was an example where our code really showed differences between different test markets. And we see that also when we look at scale, right? So eventually we'll talk about all of California versus looking at a specific area. And one of the really cool things we saw is by leveraging economies of scale, when you include more cities, if you were to do this in implementation, what this would look like, right, is a statewide implementation as opposed to a city-led implementation. You also can reduce the number of cars you need in your fleet by taking advantage of greater car sharing and more kind of spread out demand across the day. So those were a couple key insights. Maybe we can flick to slide, I think, 44, Jack.
Of course. And one thing to quickly add is looking at the numbers for Seattle. One thing is we didn't do, for our village analysis, we can see that the number of 705, given that Seattle would potentially be our most populous region that we'd be doing. We zoned in on parts of the city, which would explain why this number might be a little bit lower than we would expect. So it's not the entire city. We were running the village analysis for our ODD. So slide 46.
Yeah, so here we can see, and this really captures this idea of building out an ODD, right, an operational design domain, because again, the town boundaries of Greenwich, and this is like Seattle, spread a lot further than the downtown core. But for our first tests, we've created a bounding box with latitude and longitude coordinates, and we can see what in the top left figure here, it's a little bit small, but each of these bubbles represents the size of it, represents the scale, right? So how many people are entering or exiting cars, and then the color also corresponds to that, right? So really hot areas are kind of yellow, right? That's where there's going to be a lot of demand. And here that looks like right around the downtown core. And then as you get further from that, it cools off a little bit. But ultimately what that will look like when you look at the entire state, right, is that, again, the core downtown areas, and looking at the entire state here on the bottom left, isn't the entire state's demand. It's demand from the bounding box in the top left to the entire state, right? So at least one endpoint of each trip is going to be within our bounding box. And so we can see this kind of distribution where the vast majority of the trips are short in length. And then there's kind of a long right-hand tail of longer trips. And that's what we see on the top right here, is we have this immediate crest, and this is going to be the trips that are within the downtown core. So very short trips. It kind of tails off a little bit and flattens out. These are kind of interpreted as trips within the town, the county to, neighboring towns. And then the really long tail at the top, where it very gradually goes out to 100%, are going to be our trips longer distances, right? So we saw trips in New York City. We even saw, which we thought was pretty funny, given the test market, trips to Nantucket, trips to Boston, California. And all of these trips kind of form that really long right-hand tail. And so kind of what this means in terms of implementation as we scroll down a couple slides, is that the taxis on the road, well, one, the demand is very temporal. So we see this kind of bimodal distribution of a morning rush hour and then an evening rush hour. And then some people work off shifts, right? And so we see that reflected, that it's not a totally bimodal, unlike schools, which we'll get to, which is almost completely bimodal. And then going another couple slides down, we see, actually, let's flip to the school slides, which is here, which is a great comparison, right? This, we're seeing basically a much more spread out distribution, so far less of a tail. Students aren't really taking those long trips, and the temporal distribution is much more clustered around 2 points in time. And I think that this was an interesting market case too, right? And it's one thing that we talked about a lot in our presentation in class is school trips, because in a town like Greenwich, we have a lot of families. A lot of trips that are happening are, say, a mother bringing their child to school, right? So to drive 5 miles to school, drop their kid off, and then drive home. And when you think about what that actually means in terms of utilization of cars, well, even though there might be 2 people in the car, it's really only to serve the purpose of 1 person, right? So if you look at that total round trip, the vehicle occupancy there is almost like 1/2, right? Because the trip that matters, getting to school, is occupied for half of the distance. And then the other half is just repositioning the car back to the family's home. If you had a ton of taxis, you could really take up a lot of the slack here, right? So you could get that half, especially if you carpooled, into a number like 2 or 3, would be a 5 or 6-fold improvement in vehicle occupancy, right? And that has countless benefits for environmental reasons, congestion reasons, and would be a strong use case for these taxis in the town. So I'll kind of leave it there, and I guess we can answer more questions if you have any as the show goes on. But that was sort of an interesting test market in our case.
Let's, I think we want to bring Jason Sun into the picture here.
So, hi, my name is Jason. I am a junior in the Oyster Department, and I'm also from California. So we looked at the whole state of California, and from the bubble chart, you can see that most of the trips are focused around the Bay Area and the LA area. And if you go to the next slide, we compared Oakland to California as a state. And as you can see, when we include all of the trips in California, we see a more even distribution. That's probably just because it's just be based off the normal distribution, having more people are going to each distance. And also, as you can see from the temporal distribution, we have the scales, they look the same, but the distribution on the left has a peak of 3.5K versus 600,000 on the right from the state. And as you can see, you can see a more defined morning peak, but the afternoon peak / night peak looks very similar for Oakland and for California as a whole state.
Yeah, more broadly as a trend, one of the things we looked at as we focused on the number of trips generated by a given household level, to a census block level, to a county level, to a state level, is that the distributions as a whole become much more normalized. So you're going to see these little differences in between. Oakland and California, for example, there might not be this morning peak, but instead there's just a similar peak at the end of the day as people go on more recreational trips. Maybe they go to the grocery store. That goes away as you go to the state, where you suddenly have much more of a bimodal distribution that's less region specific.
So this is our state level analysis for each of the states. We have some summary statistics. As you can see, we have around between anywhere from 4 million to 131 million trips per day for each of the states. And based on the fleet sizes, we have calculated that each car serves around 75 to 100 customers per day. And that's really a good number, because as that number increases, we can decrease the cost of transportation and increase the number of people we're serving. And our AVO is around 2 for each of the states. And that's a lot better than the 1.15 that it is now. And our ADOs are even higher than that, because when we depart, we have more people in the car, and then we drop off people along the way. And Jack and Connor, do you have any last things you want to say, wrapping up?
Yeah, I mean, we think that these are really promising results. As Jason said, just looking at the total trips per day, divide by the fleet size, that's how many trips each of these taxis serves per day. And that's 100. I mean, think about that utilization. That's incredible. What is your, like, to the viewers with cars, like your car probably sits around all day. And the fact that we have ride sharing here, the AVO is around 2 is really great. And this is average over the entire day. Like during the peak hours, we probably have even higher ride sharing rates. We definitely have even higher ride sharing rates, which shows that like on the state level, as we expand projects like Trenton even further, we have some really promising results for ride sharing, vehicle usage, decreasing the cost of transportation for all.
Connor?
Yeah, I just echo the points that Jack made. I think that one other thing that we really were excited going into this project is the kind of vast geographic and demographic diversity of all of our target markets. And what was neat, even though there's small differences between them, we really do see that this scale kind of improves across every market. So, you know, from really, really kind of tight communities like Hawaii, where it's all on one island, to the entire state of California, right, the biggest in the US. At every scale, we're seeing improvements. And I think that was really promising for what this might look like in a nationwide rollout of autonomous vehicles.
Jack Woll, Jason Sun, and Connor Larson. We will be back with more, but first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper. It's called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some interesting information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, you probably know, can be a good way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category of stocks. The website again is motoetf.com. Alain, we have a couple of quick headlines to turn to. First, Pony AI, one of the companies testing autonomous technology in California, has had that permit suspended by the DMV as a result of a collision that took place on October 28th. We should specify the permit that was suspended is the one that allows them to operate without a safety driver. They've got something like 10 vehicles registered under the special driverless testing permit program there. There are some questions we still have about this story, but it is significant.
It is significant, Fred, that and this is a troubling one because you know, California has done a lot of good things in terms of regulating and overseeing the testing of these vehicles. It's been the world leader, and as world leader, and you have to do it first, and you can't rely on somebody else. And so therefore, you know, maybe some of the things that they've done there is maybe some other states, and maybe I want to speak to our legislators here in New Jersey, that we don't want to do here in New Jersey. The provision of a driverless testing permit seems to me to be I don't know, not even inappropriate. Let me use the word inappropriate, because why would anyone want to test without a safety driver or a safety or an attendant on board ready to intervene in case something happens? I mean, what are you trying to prove? I mean, the reason one does driverless is to provide affordable mobility to somebody, is to be able to provide mobility to someone because you can't afford to provide a chauffeur. Hey, if we could all be chauffeured, my goodness.
The point is, you're saying there's really no need, Alain. There's no need to pull the safety driver unless and until you get to the point where you're doing it to make this an affordable mobility.
And until you're getting some societal benefit out of this. There's no societal benefit about, hey, I'm a company and I had a car out there driverless. Whoa. I mean, what am I trying to do? I mean, I'll blame it on the Silicon Valley mentality. It's wrong. I mean, what? Hey, look at how macho I am. Oh, I sent a vehicle out there without anybody in it. There's no societal benefit in that. What are you trying to prove? If you're trying to show that the vehicle can drive itself, I can be back there ready to grab the wheel.
So there's a
In
distinction
the
here between
DARPA,
this
in the
and what we're
DARPA
seeing in
challenge,
Arizona. And
in
what
the
we're seeing in
DARPA
Arizona.
challenge, well, no, it's different in Arizona, but in the DARPA challenge, you know, when we went back out there and changed one line of code and ran the course again, we didn't let the vehicle go out there by itself. I was there behind that thing, ready to grab it in case it went over the cliff in Beer Bottle Pass. Because I didn't want to lose the vehicle over the cliff, so I thought I could save it. Maybe I'd be there to save it, or maybe we should have just dumped it there and we wouldn't have to pay to get it back. I don't know. But what's one trying to prove? If the vehicle behaves properly, safely, with an attendant there, ready to grab the wheel, that's good. You don't need to not have the attendant there. What's in people's brains?
So having these dual permits are not a good idea.
What is not clear here is, there's a lot of discussion in the reports, and whether or not there was an attendant in the car. If Pony.ai sent a vehicle out there to test without an attendant in the car, they should be put out of business. It's irresponsible. Now,
I don't know how many of the others that have these permits are actually doing this, though.
None. Nobody's testing. Nobody's testing without an attendant behind the wheel. Mm-hmm. Why? Why would the stockholders, the investors, allow them to do that? Why take that risk? There's no reward. The only time you would want to take that risk is when there's a reward. And the reward is you're providing mobility to society. The reason there's not an operator in an elevator is because elevators are believed to be safe enough to operate without an operator. But if you had to have an operator in an elevator, Hyatt would never build a hotel that's greater than 3 stories. I wouldn't rent a room in a Hyatt on the 8th floor if I couldn't, just go upstairs or go back to my room at 2:00 in the morning after I've had a good time with Jack and Connor and Jason. No, I'd have to climb the steps. Are you joking? My room rent is going to have to reflect the cost of the operator sitting there at 2:00 in the morning waiting for me to then take me up? No. And so the only reason we have tall buildings and so on is because, of course, we've created a mobility system that allows you to get up to the 14th floor without an operator. And it's been affordable. And this is the same thing that we're trying to do. It's the only motivation for driverless. It really is. Really, do I need to sleep in the back of my car as I'm going down New Jersey Turnpike? I don't think so. Certainly, it's the value that you're giving me to be able to sleep in my car as I'm going down the New Jersey Turnpike is I don't think worth the risk or the $100 billion investment. So what is not clear about this, which I'm trying to, from the reports, they talk about autonomous, they talk about this, they talk about driverless permits. What the heck happened in this crash? And when you look at the police report, I mean, my goodness, California, you get a police report, it doesn't have the name of a driver. Now, is that indicative that there was no one in the car? And if the attendant wasn't behind the wheel, was in the back seat doing what, picking his nose or who knows what, then that should be reported on the police report.
So
And
still lots
if
of
Pony
questions here.
AI, but let me continue on the rage here, because we've got to behave here in this thing. We've got to behave in the testing. We have to make sure that, in fact, in the testing, we have both a pipe into the vehicle so that remotely we can monitor the darn thing, and we have an attendant in the vehicle who's paying attention, who's capable of intervening in case something happens. Now, it may turn out many intervenings, they happen so fast, the physics can't do anything about it. And, the human is not able to help. And probably in most cases, if not in essentially all cases. And we all, of course, want to get the technology to a point that in getting between that rock and a hard place, that it is really between a rock and a hard place, and a human couldn't have saved the day either. A meteorite came down and hit it, or whatever. A lot of stuff happened. Not very many. Only certainly less than 10% of the trips are because of things that are, that a human, that wasn't human misbehavior involved. More than 90% of the trips have human misbehavior. And so, this is an interesting one, and a lot more information has to come out on it. And if Pony.ai did have an attendant in there ready to take over, and unfortunately the attendant wasn't able to save the day, and it did whatever damage that was caused, well then, chalk it up and let's get the algorithms to work better. But if they're out there testing without an attendant in there, I mean, maybe they should go out of business.
Moving on to the next story, Alan, just a couple of others, because we have questions about that one.
Sure, we
that
have
need
questions. I
answering,
don't
right?
know. I don't see. I guess the other reporters on this thing haven't asked the questions.
Or
Okay,
haven't gotten
I
the
don't
answers.
know. Maybe
Right.
I didn't see it, or maybe I can't read. That's probably the better answer. I just can't read.
Well, then neither can I, because I didn't see it there either. A large Paris taxi company, G7, has suspended the use of Tesla Model 3 vehicles after a fatal accident last weekend. This involved an off-duty driver. Crash killed one person, injured 20 people. Initial findings suggest the accident was not caused by technical issues here, and I think Tesla put out a statement to that effect too, and that's from the transport minister in France. But I guess anything like this is concerning, and anything involving a Tesla becomes a headline.
Yeah, anything. I think, it's quite unfortunate, something happens in a Tesla and Tesla gets dragged into the issues. And so, of course, and again, a lot more information needs to be gathered here, and whether or not, Tesla and so on and so forth, there are car crashes all the time. Okay. And in some sense, that's enormously unfortunate. And as I alluded to again, and what seems to be the right information that's out there, is that most 90% as some people might claim, of those crashes are human misbehavior. I mean, we tailgate, we go too fast, we're all frustrated with this pandemic, and we take it out on the roads. I mean, it's like crazy stuff out there. But anyway, okay, so let's blame it on Tesla.
Well, we don't know yet what's going to happen.
We don't know
I
yet.
saw
We don't
something
know
about
yet.
charges against the driver, possible manslaughter charges there. So
Yeah, I
we
mean,
can see what happens.
look, I don't know if I'm the worst case, but my driving lately has not been very good. My wife continues to tell me.
Another headline: Aurora's autonomous trucks have been hauling loads that are being booked through the Uber Freight app in Texas. more progress for Aurora, I suppose. They've been doing a lot of interesting things, but
I
now
guess,
they're
but
using the Uber app.
I guess, I don't know. Great. I mean, the Uber, we were using an Uber app. I mean, I don't know. Great, wonderful.
And for the
I'm not a-
holidays, one last headline: Ford and the Ford Funds said this week that they're using an autonomous vehicle technology over the holiday season to bring fresh food to senior citizens in Southwest Detroit. So,
Well, I think it's fantastic that Ford is bringing fresh foods to people in Detroit. Okay, whether this is done with gizmos and bling on a vehicle, and who cares? Okay, really. I mean, maybe what they should do is if they're not learning something, if they're not testing, if they're not advancing the opportunity for these vehicles to more economically and efficiently deliver things for the people of Detroit. If that's not if that's not what they're doing, then they should, take the money and buy some more fruit. I think it's wonderful, but it's, geez, that's a it seems like a public relations.
well, I think it is. There's no doubt about that in a way,
it's-
Alan. But the idea, maybe, if you look on the plus side, maybe they're increasing awareness about the problem, and they're getting more headlines by saying they're using autonomous vehicles, even though there's someone involved with getting the
Yeah,
food.
I understand, and I'm not being very nice and very fair to Ford, and I should be, because we love Ford, but look, the opportunity for the autonomy is to do this much more efficiently and cheaply to get goods to the people of Detroit, and to also allow them to improve their quality of life by being able to get to more places cheaper. Okay, to me, that's the value. And the only what I'm so proud about what the governor's announcement in New Jersey is that the focus of, in the governor's words, is to really use this technology to deliver value to the customers being served. Okay, and it's not a grandstand for this or a grandstand for that, or at least that's not the way I read it. Okay, it is a recognition that for the last, I don't know, 100 years, we have tried to provide better mobility for people. That's called transit. It's moving people as opposed to moving ourselves. If we use a scooter, if we use a bicycle, if we use a car, if we use a whatever whatever, we move ourselves. Okay, some people, some parts of our neighbors, some neighbors of ours, don't have the wherewithal, be it physical, mental, financial, whatever, all, to do that for themselves. And so as a society, we have come together to provide that mobility for them. Okay. And if we look at the mobility that we've provided for them, as compared to the mobility that those of us that are so well endowed and so fortunate to provide it for ourselves, is so different, that in fact, that mobility can be brought up closer to what we, who have had the wonderful benefit of having the capabilities, assets to do it for ourselves, for their mobility, for those that have it, to come a lot closer to what we can deliver to ourselves. That's the equity piece. And this equity piece has just not been sufficiently part of the whole discussion of providing transportation resources by the public out there. And unfortunately, if you look at the mobility provided for relatively short trips, afforded by the transit industry to date. It's nothing nearly as good as what you and I are able to provide for ourselves. And that's a shame. And the opportunity of this technology is to bring it up, maybe not better, but almost there. That's something worth working for. And I think that that's the fundamental message that is in Governor Murphy's announcement. He
And
called
it's really going to be an exciting year ahead.
He called it transit.
Yep.
Okay. And I said in my testimony to the legislature, to the assembly, he was humble in his describing it as leading the nation. He's leading the world. Nobody else is talking about doing this for that. And all the credit to him. So anyway, I think that that's a good thing to think about in this holiday season and for the coming of the new year. And we're going to, do what we can to help make it happen in the coming of the new year. We're going to, do the summit. Hopefully there'll be some technology companies that will want to pay attention to New Jersey. And don't come here and test driverless vehicles, okay, without an attendant on board. Please don't bother. Okay. All right. Come and operate safe driverless vehicles in New Jersey and Trenton and provide some, high quality mobility that will be affordable. That's what we want in the coming year.
It's terrific that young people like Jack, Jason, and Connor are involved in this, looking at this in your class.
I am so proud. I am so proud, and I am so proud of you. And I thank you for your attention and and your participation, and to the other members of the class during this what may not have been necessarily the best academic experience because of COVID, but at least we did have a reasonable academic experience, and I'm so proud of you for what you've done and appreciate it.
And thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO. You can get more info at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, wherever you get podcasts, and smart speakers can play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thanks for listening or watching, and please stay safe.
And have a great holiday season, and take it easy on New Year's, and enjoy, and all the best for 22.